I'm a real gangster. Hey, we
What's
can't
up,
even
bro?
do music no more. I don't play that shit. I don't care about no opportunity, none of that. You gotta pay deep. Tell them, Katie, you gotta pay deep into what be going on out here so you can stay safe. Fuck you. I don't like you no more. Don't ever call me. I don't wanna do no song with you. Leave me alone.
The fallout between NBA YoungBoy and NoCap has now reached a level that many fans never imagined possible. And no, that's not exaggerated language. This isn't clickbait meant to grab views. This is the reality of a situation that has spiraled far beyond hurt feelings and industry politics. Two artists who once stood side by side inside one of Southern rap's most closely watched movements are now further apart than ever. What began as tension over loyalty, respect, and disappointment has evolved into something much darker. And once a situation crosses this line, history shows there usually isn't any coming back. YoungBoy didn't simply turn down NoCap's attempt to make peace. Instead, he answered with words so direct and so serious that the entire conversation instantly changed. Fans stopped arguing about who was right and who was wrong. They started asking a completely different question. Is NoCap actually in danger? Because when somebody is told they have to pay money just to remain protected, that stops sounding like rap drama. That's something entirely different. And that's exactly where things appear to be today. Yo, what's good, family? Welcome back to the channel. If you've been keeping up with everything happening around YoungBoy and the Never Broke Again camp, then you already know this tension didn't happen overnight. This story has been building quietly for years, but what just happened pushed the situation into territory that very few people saw coming. You won't believe how quickly things escalated. Today, we're breaking down the full timeline, from how these two artists first built their relationship, to the moments that fractured it, to the public move NoCap made in hopes of easing tensions. We'll also examine why YoungBoy's reaction didn't just reject the peace offering, it took things somewhere with very real consequences. Because at this point, this story is no longer just about music. It's about what happens when rap beef begins spilling into real life. And it's about what it means when one of hip-hop's most influential artists makes a threat that many believe could carry weight beyond social media. We're unpacking everything right now. But before we talk about where things stand today, we need to go back and start from the beginning, because you can't fully understand this latest escalation without understanding what existed before everything fell apart. You can't appreciate how serious this situation feels unless you first understand how strong the bond between these two artists once appeared to be. A lot of fans genuinely believed this partnership was built to last. That's why so many people are emotionally invested in how things unfolded. NBA YoungBoy, born Kentrell Deshaun Gaulden in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, didn't rise through the traditional music industry system. His journey was built on survival. He built his career while dealing with legal troubles, releasing music at an unbelievable pace, and continuing to push forward regardless of the obstacles in front of him. Project after project, setback after setback, he refused to slow down. That relentless consistency helped him build one of the most loyal fan bases in modern rap. But what truly separated YoungBoy from artists with similar backgrounds wasn't only the volume of music he released, although that output was remarkable for someone so young. It was the emotion behind the music. Fans felt like they were hearing genuine pain, real experiences, and unfiltered honesty rather than carefully manufactured stories. That authenticity created a connection between YoungBoy and his audience unlike almost anything else in today's rap landscape. When YoungBoy launched Never Broke Again as his own imprint, it wasn't simply a business decision created in a boardroom. It represented independence. It represented ownership. It represented building something on his own terms. The artists brought into that circle weren't selected solely because of statistics, streaming numbers, or industry projections. These were personal decisions made by someone who attached real meaning to loyalty and trust. His supporters understood that immediately. They knew that when YoungBoy welcomed somebody into the NBA family, it meant more than business. It meant brotherhood. And that's exactly why the breakdown between YoungBoy and NoCap hit fans so hard. NoCap, born Kobe Antoine Crawford in Mobile, Alabama, emerged as one of the Gulf South's most emotionally compelling voices in recent years. His music frequently explored grief, trauma, loss, and the painful reality of watching friends disappear to violence or lengthy prison sentences.
He transformed those experiences into melodic records that connected with listeners on a level far deeper than entertainment alone. His 2019 project, Neighborhood Hero, elevated his profile significantly and placed him firmly in conversations among people paying close attention to Southern rap's next generation. Even beyond the mainstream spotlight, many already believed NoCap possessed something special. NoCap's 2020 project, Steel Human, took those early conversations to an entirely different level. Suddenly, industry insiders weren't just noticing him, they were paying serious attention. The project showcased an artist capable of carrying a full-length body of work while maintaining emotional depth from the opening track all the way to the closing record. And in today's rap landscape, that kind of consistency is incredibly rare. The album possessed a level of cohesion that many of his peers simply weren't reaching at the time. It proved that NoCap understood something a lot of artists still struggle with: how to create an experience instead of just compiling songs and calling it an album. Then came Mr. Crawford in 2021, a release that elevated his profile even further while strengthening the connection between NoCap and listeners who saw pieces of their own lives in his music. By the time NoCap officially entered YoungBoy's circle and aligned himself with Never Broke Again, the reaction from fans of both artists was overwhelmingly positive. On paper, it felt like a perfect match. You had two artists from the Gulf South, both speaking from lived experiences rather than carefully manufactured personas. Both carried stories that resonated because they were rooted in reality. Fans genuinely believed this partnership could shape Southern rap for years to come. The collaboration made sense in virtually every way that mattered to the people invested in both artists. Early conversations in the streets and across social media all pointed toward the same conclusion. NoCap had found the right home, a label led by someone who understood the same pressures, came from a similar environment, and knew firsthand what survival looks like when the circumstances around you seem determined to break you. That shared understanding became the foundation of everything. And that's exactly why what happened next was so difficult for fans to process. Because when relationships built on personal trust begin falling apart, they rarely collapse quietly. They unravel loudly. And when they do, they tend to expose everything underneath. The first public signs of trouble surfaced in 2022. But to fully understand what happened, you first have to understand how YoungBoy communicates. He doesn't operate through carefully crafted press statements or heavily managed publicists. He speaks directly to his audience. He goes live. He posts exactly how he feels in the moment, without filtering those emotions through teams designed to protect his image. That level of transparency is one of the biggest reasons his fan base remains so fiercely loyal. Fans feel like they know who he truly is because for years he's consistently shown them himself without watering anything down for mainstream acceptance. But that same transparency comes with consequences. When something is bothering YoungBoy, people usually find out immediately. And in 2022, it became increasingly clear that something wasn't sitting right with him. He began making public comments that fans quickly connected to people inside his inner circle. He spoke about loyalty, about individuals failing to move in ways that reflected the support and opportunities they had been given, about showing somebody genuine love, opening doors for them, bringing them into a world you built from the ground up, only to feel that same loyalty wasn't being returned. YoungBoy's fan base, arguably one of the most dedicated and detail-oriented communities in hip-hop, started connecting those comments to NoCap almost instantly. And the issue people kept pointing toward wasn't vague at all. It centered around NoCap maintaining friendly relationships with artists tied to camps YoungBoy had publicly distanced himself from. Names like Lil Baby and Lil Durk weren't neutral figures in YoungBoy's world. The history between those camps had played out publicly enough that anyone paying attention already understood where YoungBoy stood and why. These weren't casual industry relationships that YoungBoy simply felt uneasy about. They involved long-standing tensions that he had never softened his stance on, regardless of what it may have cost him professionally. Inside the culture and code that governs YoungBoy's circle, remaining close with individuals connected to those camps wasn't viewed as ordinary networking. It was seen as a deliberate decision, a signal, a reflection of where someone's true loyalties existed when real situations emerged. And this is where many people outside the culture often misunderstand what happened between YoungBoy and NoCap. The expectation within YoungBoy's camp isn't just avoiding certain people when it's convenient. The expectation is that your actions consistently make your loyalty obvious without anyone needing to question it. That you move in a way that clearly reflects whose side you're truly on. None of those expectations are written into contracts or formal agreements. They're understood through proximity, experience, and the culture surrounding that circle. It's the kind of understanding that rarely needs to be explained, because everyone involved already knows the rules. And once NoCap's moves within the industry started appearing inconsistent with that understanding, the relationship between YoungBoy and NoCap slowly began shifting in a direction that, as we'll see, became incredibly difficult to repair. NoCap didn't stay silent once these tensions started becoming public. He responded, but the way he responded wasn't explosive or disrespectful. Instead, he approached the situation calmly and thoughtfully, which in many ways made his message hit even harder than an outright confrontation would have. NoCap made it clear that his focus remained on his own career, his own journey, and his own future as an artist with an identity separate from anyone else's. After all, he was from Mobile, not Baton Rouge. The relationships he had built throughout the music industry came through years of work and networking that existed long before Never Broke Again entered the picture. His public stance was straightforward and unapologetic. Signing to a label shouldn't automatically mean inheriting another person's conflicts or cutting off relationships that existed independently of those disputes. From a broader perspective, that sounds like an artist trying to preserve his individuality while navigating a complicated business environment.
Here's where things become much more complicated. Inside YoungBoy's world, that logic doesn't necessarily register the same way. Instead, it can be interpreted as someone placing their personal comfort and professional convenience above the values and expectations of the circle they've joined. And in environments where loyalty isn't viewed as a preference, but as something deeply connected to trust and real-world relationships, the difference between outside logic and internal expectations becomes massive. It's not a small misunderstanding. It's the difference between being fully inside the circle and standing outside of it. The divide between what made sense to NoCap and what YoungBoy expected wasn't simply a disagreement over professional boundaries. It reflected two very different understandings of what loyalty actually meant. And once that difference became public, with both fan bases watching closely and taking sides, the chances of things remaining private became almost non-existent. There was never really a version of this story that was going to end with a quiet business split and nothing more. The structure of Never Broke Again itself is important to understand here. This wasn't a traditional label with layers of executives, management teams, and corporate systems designed to absorb internal friction. Never Broke Again was built around YoungBoy personally, and naturally, it reflected him personally. His feelings and perspectives carried enormous influence inside that environment, in ways that couldn't simply be separated from business. There wasn't much distance between what YoungBoy felt and how those emotions affected the atmosphere around him. So when tension between him and NoCap began rising, it became visible almost immediately, and it escalated fast. Fans tracked every development with the intensity of people watching something they genuinely cared about slowly fall apart in real time. Questions surrounding NoCap's future within the camp unfolded over months, and supporters remained deeply invested throughout the entire process. Collaborations that many expected never materialized the way fans had hoped. Public interactions became increasingly rare and eventually seemed to disappear altogether. Moments that once felt natural between the two artists simply stopped happening. Even release patterns appeared different to longtime followers, who sensed that something behind the scenes had shifted, even if every detail wasn't publicly confirmed. And in hip-hop culture, silence can speak louder than words. When two artists who once publicly supported each other suddenly stop acknowledging one another, people notice immediately. The absence itself becomes a message. Fans analyzed every move, every post, and every missing interaction across social media platforms for months. Debates exploded everywhere. Reactions during this period were intense and sharply divided.
YoungBoy supporters, known for being fiercely loyal and highly protective, largely viewed NoCap's independent positioning as proof that their concerns about his loyalty had been justified. Many weren't interested in the nuances surrounding career autonomy or industry relationships. They interpreted the situation through the same code they believed YoungBoy lived by. Through that lens, NoCap had failed to uphold an important expectation. The conversation in many YoungBoy fan communities was simple. YoungBoy had extended genuine trust, and NoCap hadn't reciprocated in the way they believed he should have. End of discussion. NoCap's fanbase saw things very differently. They argued passionately that no artist should be expected to abandon relationships or adopt personal disputes simply because of a business affiliation. They maintained that NoCap had every right to preserve his own identity and navigate the industry on his own terms, regardless of who he was signed to. Both sides dug in publicly, and the debate over what YoungBoy owed NoCap and what NoCap owed YoungBoy became one of the most discussed topics in online rap commentary during that entire stretch. Channels covering hip-hop news and drama generated massive engagement discussing this fallout because audience interest remained consistently high and deeply emotional. Then, in late 2025, something happened that briefly changed the atmosphere and gave fans reason to believe reconciliation might still be possible. YoungBoy and NoCap crossed paths. News of that interaction spread quickly throughout the hip-hop community. People who had followed this story from the beginning viewed it as a potential turning point. For the first time in a long time, fans started wondering if the worst was finally behind them. Maybe, just maybe, both artists had reached a point where peaceful coexistence was possible, and the hostility that once defined their relationship could finally begin to fade. People began wondering if enough time had passed for old wounds to finally start healing. Maybe the original issues had cooled off. Maybe both sides had grown. Online culture, which loves redemption stories and second chances, embraced that possibility almost immediately because people genuinely want to believe friendships can survive conflict. Commentary channels quickly framed the interaction as a major turning point. The tone in comment sections shifted almost overnight. Instead of debating who was right and who was wrong, fans started imagining what reconciliation could mean not only for these two artists, but for the culture as a whole. But this is where the story takes a turn that caught almost everybody off guard. Because whatever that late 2025 meeting represented, it didn't last. If there was ever a truce, even an unofficial one, it didn't hold for long. The tension resurfaced, and many observers traced the renewed fallout back to a public message from NoCap that he likely believed would help move things forward. NoCap spoke openly about wanting to leave the conflict behind. His comments were reflective and carried a more spiritual tone than many people expected. He explained that he didn't want to continue carrying resentment into the future. He spoke about understanding that everyone is on their own journey and that holding on to anger was ultimately hurting his own peace more than anyone else. He framed forgiveness as a personal decision tied to growth, healing, and moving forward, rather than remaining stuck in the past. For fans who had spent years hoping these two could eventually make peace, those words felt significant. Many interpreted NoCap's message as a genuine attempt to publicly extend an olive branch. They saw it as a vulnerable moment, one that left room for reconciliation if YoungBoy was willing to accept it. But this is where the story became even more complicated, because YoungBoy's response to NoCap's public comments wasn't viewed by many fans as a step toward repairing the relationship. It wasn't a simple acknowledgement followed by distance. Instead, it reignited discussions about just how deep this divide had become. YoungBoy later posted a video addressing people connected to NoCap's camp, and the reaction online was immediate. The message sparked intense debate across social media platforms, with many fans arguing that the conflict had clearly moved far beyond music industry disagreements. What had once looked like a dispute centered around loyalty was now being discussed in much more serious terms. One particular part of YoungBoy's message drew widespread attention. He referenced the phrase "pay beef," and that language quickly became the center of conversation throughout the hip-hop community. Fans and commentators offered different interpretations, but many agreed that the wording reflected just how strained the relationship had become. Regardless of interpretation, the comments made it clear that the issues between the two sides were far from resolved. What made the moment resonate so strongly wasn't just the language itself, it was the broader context surrounding it.
YoungBoy has built a reputation for speaking directly and rarely hiding how he feels.
Because of that, many fans tend to take his public statements seriously, especially when they're delivered with that level of specificity and directed toward particular individuals. The biggest takeaway from the entire exchange, though, was how far this conflict had evolved from where it originally started. Back in 2022, much of the discussion centered around loyalty, industry relationships, and personal expectations within YoungBoy's circle. Those issues largely existed within the realm of reputation and personal dynamics, but by this point, the public fallout had escalated well beyond that. The disagreement was no longer being viewed as a simple dispute between artists. Instead, it had become one of the most closely watched and emotionally charged conflicts in hip-hop, with fans on both sides deeply invested in how the story would ultimately end. YoungBoy didn't simply turn down the public olive branch. In the eyes of many fans, he completely flipped the meaning of it. NoCap made one of his most open and vulnerable public statements, and YoungBoy's response suggested that the issues between them had moved far beyond something that could be solved with a few words about forgiveness. For viewers who had followed this saga from the very beginning, that response changed the entire conversation. Up until that point, most people had been analyzing the fallout through the lens of rap politics, loyalty, and industry relationships. But after that video surfaced, the discussion shifted almost instantly. People stopped debating who was right or wrong in the original loyalty dispute that began back in 2022. Instead, fans began asking what this latest exchange meant for the future of the relationship. They questioned how NoCap and his camp would respond. Others wondered whether there was still any realistic path toward reconciliation after things had become so public and so personal. The uncertainty surrounding the situation only fueled even more discussion across social media. The broader hip-hop community's reaction revealed something important about where the culture currently stands when rap conflicts appear to move beyond music. Conversations exploded across every major platform, with fans and commentators debating whether the latest exchange crossed a line. Even some longtime YoungBoy supporters appeared divided. It wasn't necessarily because people questioned his right to feel betrayed or hold a grievance. Rather, many argued that there is still a major difference between expressing disappointment and escalating a public conflict to another level. And that distinction became one of the biggest talking points surrounding this entire situation. What makes this story so compelling, and honestly so concerning for many fans, is how dramatically it evolved over time. What started as disagreements over loyalty, personal relationships, and expectations inside a close-knit circle eventually grew into one of the most talked-about conflicts in hip-hop. That's why so many people have stopped looking at this as just another rap beef. Instead, they're watching two artists who once seemed genuinely close drift further apart with every public exchange. At the end of the day, this is bigger than music for a lot of people invested in the story. It's about friendship, loyalty, expectations, and what happens when those things break down in public. Fans on both sides are still hoping that somehow cooler heads eventually prevail and that this situation doesn't continue escalating. Because regardless of where people stand, most supporters simply don't want to see the conflict spiral any further. What do y'all think? How did a disagreement over loyalty evolve into one of the biggest ongoing stories in hip-hop? Do you think there's still a path for YoungBoy and NoCap to eventually make peace, or has too much happened at this point? And if you were advising both camps, what would be the smartest move moving forward? Drop your thoughts down in the comments because I want to know exactly where y'all stand on this situation. And make sure you click on the video showing on your screen right now because we've got even more deep dives covering the stories shaping hip-hop culture today. Appreciate every single one of y'all for rocking with the channel, and we'll catch you in the next one.